This is Maiku, and you are listening to the Narrow Path in the Floating Mountains podcast. This is a podcast that is dedicated to stories and tellings of my spiritual experiences and its relationship with mental health. Some of the stories I will be sharing will cover many topics such as the parallels in spirituality and mental health, ghost stories, dreams, tarot reading, mediumship, and more. I do want to provide a disclaimer that I do not have any certification in spiritual healing, mental health therapy, nor do I have an altar to practice Hmong shamanistic healing or rituals. Many of the stories I will be sharing are based purely on my personal experiences and how I have made sense of them throughout the years. So to those who are listening to this podcast, I hope that you will enjoy my stories and join me on the narrow path in the floating mountains. Hi everyone, I am back with a new episode. You all must be wondering what the heck happened. I think since the last time I posted, I think it's been about 2 years. I posted my last episode in 2021, and I vaguely remember that it was in February, but here we are on June 16, 2023 with a new episode, or right now as I'm recording this, it's the 16th of June, but this will be posted on the 19th. So hopefully I make it out. I do want to go ahead and just give you all an update on just what's been happening. So for this episode, I want to dedicate it to the idea of hermit moding or being a hermit. I'll elaborate into that a little bit, but of course, the updates. What has been happening with me between now and the last time I posted. And you all may be wondering who was the person that I was gonna have on as a guest, and that person was actually my older sister. I wanted to have her come on and talk about her spiritual experiences, her spiritual awakening, as an example of someone who you can be really close with, but still be on a different trajectory of their spiritual or healing journey. And the crazy thing is that as we recorded it, after we recorded it, and I had it edited down and ready to be posted, the file kept crashing. I still have the audio. It's just, I have no idea why it's just not able to post. And so, after a few days too of just trying to post it, being really frustrated with it, during that same time, a lot of things were happening with my personal life, with my family, and then with my business. These are all areas in my life that are very important. And so if anything were to go awry, that it truly tends to impact my way of living, my being. And so a lot of things was just kind of converging at this point. And so I had to take a break, a really, really long break to sort that out. And here I am recording a new episode where I am in a completely different headspace than I was then. And for many people, it's, I think what I can provide, or the advice I can provide, is that where you are 2 years ago, a month ago, a day ago, is going to be completely different from where you are later on. And it really rings true, that saying. I think that where I am now, I'm more capable of handling my own emotions, my own mental health, my spiritual health, and my relationship with those who are in that inner circle, and witness my growth with me. And so where I'm at now, it's a ton more manageable. I don't want to say that it's better. I think that it kind of fluctuates, what even is better, right? And so even though I went through a lot in between just these past 2 years, right? I do not regret any decisions I've made up until this point, because those decisions kind of helped me get to where I am. And it wasn't anything where it was harmful towards others. I think it was just decisions that at the time I questioned, were they the best for me? And I can honestly say they were. They were definitely the best for me. And so that's kind of the ambiguous and vague update, but I want to be very present for how I reflect on those two, and rather than dwell on the past, because that's what I tend to do, I felt the need to present it in this way to honor the growth that's taken place. Aside from that, the updates that I have, I am looking to make this more consistent. I have a lot of big plans for this podcast, than things that can stem or branch out from this podcast, and I can't wait to share that journey with you all too. So this is going to be a really big new thing, something that I don't even know how I'm going to approach it. I don't even know what I'm going to do yet. I just have this big idea that I want to implement, and I want to be as transparent about that process as possible. And so hopefully you all can tune in and witness that as well with me. I know it's going to be a long and arduous road and path, but I think about the 37 years that I've lived and all the obstacles and challenges I've overcome, or even the growth or even the learning required, that my superpower is slow and steady. My Taurian energy, that is my embodiment, is slow and steady, and just working towards those goals and being committed and staying on that path. And so I will slowly unravel that as the big idea starts becoming more solidified. But aside from that, I do want to make this podcast more consistent. I am shooting for a goal of posting every bi-weekly and on Mondays. I'm thinking I'm gonna want to post this, because I want to make it a regular schedule of posting these every Monday at 6 p.m. And so y'all, as I'm talking about this, I'm planning it too. I literally just said 6 p.m. and noted it down on my notes, because that's how it's gonna be, right? That's how open to just what the universe is handing me is going to be for me. That's how I'm accepting things, because I'm learning to, right now, the chapter that I'm in my journey is learning to be comfortable in my own peace and calm, and I struggle with that a lot. And so now I'm learning how to hone that. I'm learning how to be at peace, in solitude, in my own skin, in my own environment that I've created for myself. Because I'm a very flighty person. I'm a very, if something feels wrong, or something's churning, or I have butterflies in my stomach, I will be so anxious. I would be trapped in this mindset of fight or flight. Whether it's a safe thing, a safe space or not, I tend to do that. And I know where it comes from. And so this next chapter of my life, moving into this thing that I don't know what to expect, is just trying to be at one with it. So perfect segue into what this episode is about, and it's hermit mode. And y'all might be thinking, what the heck is hermit mode? You might envision in your mind this old guy with a long beard out in the mountains, or a lone traveler. But even though that is what we envision, it can also be the type of energy that we embody to do healing. And for me, I'm very comfortable in my hermit mode, my old sage mode, right? The sage that travels has had so much crap happen in their life that now they are learning to be at peace with the solitude or being within themselves and providing assistance and help, or when it's time to network or connect with others, then it will happen naturally and to fall into it naturally. And so that's my general explanation for it, but essentially hermit mode, right? So hermit mode, I'm looking it up. For me, that's what I consider hermit mode, but a hermit is a person who lives in seclusion. And oftentimes you'll see this hermit or this person as the monk or as the nun or someone who seeks solitude via like spirituality. And another way that it's been used, or the term, or even that way of living, is that a person, this hermit, denotes anyone living apart from the rest of society or having entirely or in part withdrawn from society for any reason, right? So breaking away from society, from culture, kind of like when people are like, okay, I need to have a social media break. It's kind of like the energy of the hermit coming through, like just shutting yourself off from the world just to have a break, because all the energies that are happening right now with this world, for sensitive people or people who are just very prone to absorbing energies of other or feeling energies of other, sensitive, right? Those who are just really sensitive, they will tend to just need a lot of time to themselves to recharge their battery and head back out into the world. And so in the spiritual community, you hear that a lot, right? Of coming back to yourself, shutting yourself off for a little bit so you can recharge and re-enter the world. That's essentially what hermit mode means. I call it hermit mode. It's called several different ways, but that's usually what I tend to go towards the definition. For me, I came to that understanding because for a long time I used to have this like fear of missing out, right? We all know what fear of missing out feels like, and feeling like you need to invest in relationships by reciprocating, even though you might be drained, that you feel an obligation to reciprocate, and that exchange becomes a little draining, right? And so coming away from that and learning how just shutting myself off and secluding myself from all these different connections or different energies or even relationships helped me to become more familiar with myself. And that's strictly particular to my healing journey. As someone who was still trying to figure out how to start healing, I was very codependent on the validation or even the affections of others. And so for me, it became really draining to hone or harness this to reciprocate in a relationship. That it became really taxing on me, and I started finding myself doing this with my jobs, mostly with my jobs. And not only that, overcompensating for those who were seeking help from me. And so as I was overcompensating, because I would project project my own experiences onto this person. For example, oh, this person is reaching out to me for help for this specific reason. I know how it feels like. I know how this person feels like. I'm going to do all my best to provide this person with the support they need, the support that I didn't have for myself. And so I know what that feels like. I'm going to go really hard into it and support them. And so for me, I kept doing that. I kept just giving more than what I had, even for myself. And although it is no fault of that person, I also realized that my overcompensation was draining me too. And because I didn't have these boundaries, I was bypassing myself, and in turn did not know how to best communicate my needs. And so my needs were convoluted, they were blurred, and I just didn't know how to even stop, right? It's very similar to an addiction. You have this addiction, so in the context of an addiction, right? You have this addiction of wanting to help others. And when you help others, it feels good. And even within that, you feel the dopamine of helping others, like, oh yeah, this feels so good, like it's a release. That when you keep searching for that, it becomes addictive. Addictive in a way where you feel like, I know what it feels like to not be supported, so in turn, I'm going to do this because I know what they need, and I'm going to continue supporting others, even though I won't have any. And in a way, I started feeling that overcompensation was deflecting too. It was starting to bounce back towards me, where I was projecting anger. I was projecting, not necessarily because of what I was receiving from my clients, but the more I honed in on the lack of support that I was receiving, I also started harboring more anger and rage towards the people who didn't support me, right? So I started thinking a lot about that, if that makes sense. And so I started comparing the path of the journey of the people who are seeking help from me with myself, where I was internalizing it, right? And that's something that I've been working on recently too, is not internalizing the lack of support or the trauma that I experienced. So what would happen is that I would provide the support. I would think about my healing journey, and I would regress. And as I regressed, I started staying in that space. I started staying in this particular timeline, and then I started operating again within the ways that I operated in this timeline, even though I had done all the healing and I knew how to address my own traumas and triggers. That I started to regress, and all this old stuff started happening. All this old stuff within myself started rising to the surface. And so I started to not only feel depleted, but reverting back to these old ways of thinking within my timeline. And when I realized that I had to step on the brakes, come to a screeching halt, and do a self-check-in. And for me, when I did, it started to clear up. I started to return to self again. I started clearing all that fog, and started focusing back onto my personal needs and healing. So also, as I was going into hermit mode, not even from, obviously there's the usual being cut off from like toxic relationships, toxic environments, from energy vampires, all the things that you can think of, right? All the things that you can identify that drains your energy. That when I started thinking about it, I'm like, I'm doing all the right things, but why am I still feeling depleted? It was like time for me to think about, you need to do this for yourself. You need to go into hermit mode for yourself. There are people who are going to want your help, but they can also wait. And those who understand, they will understand, and those who don't, they won't. They won't ever understand. And so it took me it was really hard for me to do that, and do that in a way where it wasn't going to be harmful to others, because no matter how much I communicated my fullest emotions or my fullest intentions, that it could still be interpreted differently. And so it was hard for me to come to terms with that. Is that like, ooh, you can tell yourself, you can not yourself, you can tell the person over text like how sorry you are, or how you apologize for the inconvenience, or you can explain to them like, this is not my intention at all, and I apologize that I hurt you. That person, it's the you can't control it. You can't control it, and you can't control what they're going to take from the situation. And that if that is the case, then you have to step back. And I think for me, it went back to like being codependent. Like, I needed them to be okay before I can be okay. And when thinking about it like that too, it wasn't fair to that person, because that person and how they felt triggered by the situation, like, that's completely up to them too, right? Like, allowing them to also feel whatever anger or whatever frustration they have within this interaction, that it's completely out of my hands. And that for me, I didn't have to like fix it. I didn't have to fix what I said. I didn't have to make it better, because I had already tried that. I had already tried to communicate to the best of my ability what my intentions were, and do it in a way where I wasn't going to completely submit myself to being beat up, right? Being beat up verbally or emotionally or mentally. That I also had to honor my healing and my growth and the boundaries that I needed. And so I came to terms with that. I came to terms with that, and each time that I did it, I felt a little bit better about walking away from situations that I just could not fix. I could not cross my own boundaries to make that person happy, even though what I was saying was my truest and authentic self. And there was just nothing that I could do with, you have nothing left, and this person is still wanting more from you. And what do you do in that situation, right? When you tried your best to communicate and also try to be acknowledged, like, I'm a human being too, that I have my own needs and I have my own healing that I need to do, and I need to step back to do that. And if a person couldn't honor that, then there was nothing I could do about it. There just comes a breaking point, right? There comes a point where there's just going to be so much tension with the pulling of the two sides that someone is just going to have to give, right? Like in the game of tug of war, two sides are pulling so hard that it's going nowhere. In that situation, it really just comes down to who is going to give, or that rope is going to snap, or whatever the situation may be, right? It's just not going to go anywhere. Then what will happen? We're just going to be standing there. It's just going to be standstill. And so I realized within this time of going into hermit mode that I really had to just release that rope and walk away from it and return to self. Find solitude and peace within myself again. And so I did a lot of that. But in the meantime, how it impacted my business was, and I wanted to segue into how this affected my business and the podcast and my family and personal healing. I talked a little bit about my personal healing, but having to stepping away from just opening myself up or overcompensating helped me to establish boundaries with my business too. And during this time, I was relocating because my studio or my suite, I went from a suite to a studio because it was a really unfortunate situation where there was a lot of miscommunication, but also withholding information that I do not want to elaborate on this podcast because I'm over and done with that. But it forced me to let go of comfort, right? Because everything on the material level was comfort, but deeply inside and what was going to be in alignment with my authentic self was not there. And so if I wasn't able to authentically be myself in that space, then I felt the need to move. And so I relocated my studio and everything just happened so quickly. There's just not enough time in this podcast episode to explain it, but I will save it for another episode. Which I think it's gonna be grouped into an episode on manifestation, because I really think I'm a great manifester, and maybe talk a little bit about this idea of manifesting, because I know it was a hot take on TikTok for a bit. But anyways, manifesting just happened so quickly. I'm in a new space. I wrapped up my first year this past June because I officially moved in June of last year. So it's June now, and it's a year, and I think a lot of people really expected me to just be inconsistent or unstable, and I think a lot of people thought I was going to relocate again, but joke's on them. That's just my little victory of hey, no, I can be stable. And that no matter how much I try to validate that I just don't want to say I'm bad luck with it, that a lot of really crazy shit just happens to me, that I try not to fall into the mindset of trying to validate myself for those people, because people have already created a narrative about who I am and how I apply my business ethics, that I'm just it is how it is. There's just no way that I could persuade people. But thinking about it in a way where even though I've come across these challenges, that I can always pick myself back up, dust myself off, and keep going, right? A lot of these things, I feel a lot of things in the spiritual community, it's so cliche, but it's so true. When you really apply it, it's so true. You just have to dust yourself up and keep it going. Because life and people's lives, even the people who are harmful, their lives are going to still keep going. To them, you're just a blip to them. And it does so much harm to yourself when you hold on to it. I still feel the frustration and the anger with that situation, but I don't try to put it in the present, because again, what I'm currently working on in this chapter is being at peace with my calm, the safe space that I've created for myself, and having evolved from all these challenges I've experienced. And so hermit mode helped me with that, and I still am willing to stick to hermit mode because it helps me. I'm also very empathic and sensitive to the energies of others, so I need a lot of time to recharge. I'm learning to establish boundaries with certain energies that offload to, and so I'm learning that. So how hermit mode went with like my family situation, I think, again, establishing boundaries with your family members, that was a huge part of my learning curve these past 2 years too. Just coming back from that, and I feel like there's still frustration, but it's a little healthier than what it was. So that's how hermit mode helped me. It's just like, hey, you guys, I'm really stepping away from this, so just so you know, like, don't bother me. Or just like, know that if I'm not responsive, this is why. But yeah, a lot of things happened with my family too during this period, these past 2 years, of just trying to figure out where we are, how we're going to move forward. When I say family, I mean myself, my husband, and my son. Just kind of like where we're going to be. For us, we were able to have my son diagnosed for autism, and so he has occupational and speech therapy with the let's see, what are they, with a local hospital. And then he was also getting speech and occupational therapy with his school, but we had just recently found out that the school is shutting down, and so we were able to enroll him into another school that has a really great special education program. And so I think it's just one of those things too, of like, again, things just kind of moving the way that they need to. And that for our family and with my son, even though the school is closing down and there was a lot of issues within the school that we didn't know about, mostly with just how long they were going to last. It was a charter school that ended up shutting down due to lack of funding, and unfortunately that's a common practice here in Milwaukee, where charter schools, they just open up for a short period and then they shut down. I mean, all the schools here, the public schools here, are struggling. Public schools in the lower income communities are struggling here, and so it was just unfortunate. It was one of those things where his school just did not get the funding, and having to relocate. But the school that he's at now was one of the schools that I really wanted him to get into, but the school at that time, and they still are lottery based, and it's just a lot harder to get him in because there's just a lot of people who want to get into these Montessori schools. So my son's in a Montessori school, and so we were able to get him into the one that I originally really wanted him to get into, but I was just like, oh, we have no hope because we don't have any other people who would vouch for us. But by some way, he's turning 7 this year. Like, by some way, like, after he entered the school at K3, and now he's entering into first grade. So that was like three years, because it was at the beginning of the pandemic. So it was 3 years that he was at the school, and just kind of how quickly that energy shifted was affirming to me how like the intentions that I wanted to have for the intentions for opportunities for my son kind of like unraveled through this process. And just thinking like, oh my gosh, it was so hard for us to have him adapt to a new setting. Like, it was really rough his first year, but it was so affirming how everything worked out in the end. And this new school is a pretty well-established school. A lot of people who... Actually, my professor used to have her daughter at the school. And so kind of just resting my heart on that, like, yeah, I know this is going to be a good school. That it was another light at the end of the tunnel. So that was happening a lot. In hermit mode, a lot of that was happening. Of like just trying to navigate your life the best that you can, and seeing how something great comes out of it in the end. And I think that's how I've only been able to like move through these past 2 years, is like trusting that, oh, something good is gonna happen, something good is just gonna come out of this. Like, it sucks that we are dealing with this right now, it is out of our control, but something good just has to happen out of this. Something is just gonna have to give us the grace that we need to survive this right now. And each time that we were saved divinely, or by way of just like putting in the work, that it just made me believe even more that there was something greater for us. There was something better for us. Each time there was always something better, no matter our circumstances, or no matter how we overcame that. And it's just kind of like these small victories that were happening that kept me going. And some days it's still very hard. That's something that I still struggle with. It's just believing in that there's something better that can come out of this. But it's just been so validating to experience it on my own. And I think that was what took me a long time to come to, was that I had this ability to trust in myself, that it is not because of what someone else is handing out to me, or it is not because of me navigating it in the wrong way, or even me trying to take from someone else in a like underhanded way to like get the better end of the deal. It was that I did everything the way that I was supposed to, with patience and trust and faith, and it still was a situation where it worked out the best for us. And in these past 2 years was what I was learning more about, was that each time, like, you've proven to yourself each time that something was really, really hard, that you came out of it with a new perspective, a new understanding about your power and your ability and your gift and your purpose into this world, that helped me to become more confident. And so I think with everything that was happening externally, and detached from my own personal experiences of myself, my own being, that things were also unraveling in a great way with the people who I love dearly, and the thing that I love to do, that it was working out for them too. It helped me to understand that I was a part of this greater, like, interwoven, like, weave of energy, this fabric of energy, that everyone is all connected, and that it gets better. It gets better if, say, things are working out for me, then things will work out for my husband, or things will work out for my son, or things will work out for our dog even. And just trusting the process, and just having the courage and the strength to traverse the treacherous terrain. When I talk about hermit mode too, I think about the hermit card, and on the hermit card is that older sage or that old man, depending on the deck, right? The traditional Rider-Waite deck is of this man who is on the top of this mountain. They're barefoot, and all they have is a lantern and a shepherd's hook, and covering them is this black cloak. And the bottom of the cloak is torn, and gives this sense that he had been doing this for a really, really long time. He has been traveling for a really long time, using his wisdom to navigate the challenges, using his wisdom to climb this mountain, get to the summit of this mountain, to still just like keep going. Like, you've reached the summit, but there's another summit to reach. And along the way, everything that you learn that gets you to each summit is what's going to help you overcome the obstacles to reach the next summit, to reach the next level. And for me, that for some reason, like, that card just always resonates with me. There's so much symbolism within that card that rings true to just what I've experienced in the past couple years, of even the lantern on the card, where it's the only thing that he has to navigate through the darkness, because he's still traveling at night, that it's lit by you and you only to help you navigate, right? So utilizing your own inner light, your own inner wisdom to navigate this dark path, and trusting that, like, all you have is your knowledge to help you through the situation, and trusting that when you have nothing left, right? No one else to depend on. The only thing that you have left is your inner wisdom, the wisdom that comes from years and years of overcoming challenges, knowledge you've acquired, skills you've acquired in these challenges and obstacles. That's all you really have left to overcome, like, these new obstacles, finding different angles to overcome them, finding different processes, strategies to overcome them. There was a thought that had come up in a conversation I had not too long ago about strategy. Oh, it was a conversation with my husband about birds, and how birds, the different types of birds and the ways that they look for resources, and how it contributes to their intellect. The species, like, intellectual, like, how smart they are, right? Quote unquote smart they are. But each animal has their own way of, like, obtaining resources. And so we had this conversation. I think it was like one day we were looking at a starlings and how they look for food. And when you look at a starling and you're really paying close attention to them, how they look for food is they put their beaks into the ground, and then they use their beaks to spread they literally open their mouth so that the beak spreads the grass or wherever they're grazing from or foraging from. They spread it to look for insects, berries, or seeds that have fallen to the ground, and then they pick it. And so we had this conversation about starlings, because starlings are really unique and interesting creatures in that they are also great mimickers. A lot of times we think that parrots can mimic voice, mimic sounds, but starlings, they can do that as well. They're actually really great mimickers, and because we're so used to seeing them, they're actually an invasive species in America that they just look like a regular old bird in our neighborhood. But when you start looking at their behavior, it becomes a little bit more interesting. So anyways, about intellect, like knowledge, right? And intellect and evolution. So this conversation went into evolution, about how species evolve. My husband, his biology degree was in ecology and environmentalism, and so we have conversations about human and also animal evolution. So anyways, we started talking about this, and I asked him the question, like, do you think that the way that a species seeks resources or uses themselves to look for food relates to how smart the species is? And so we talked a little bit about that, and he made a really great point about it's not that one species is smarter than the other, it's just how the culture of the species, they seek resources, and it's not that, again, one species is smarter than the other, it's just their strategies are different, and that these different types of strategies also relate to how complex their the ways that they socialize or they connect with one another can be. And then we got into this conversation about the ways in which certain species socialize, and the more they socialize, the more complicated their communication skills are. Another species is ravens and crows. Ravens and crows, they have specific calls for a specific type of danger, and so they're able to recognize even something as complex as facial features on humans and on animals, and once they identify this, they can go and communicate like a specific call, right? So when we're thinking about communicating in different ways with each other, that they become, the culture is more complex. And so when we were talking about that too, we talked about how ravens and crows are very smart creatures, and they're very resourceful, and they know how to use tools, and how these like behaviors are passed down too. And so when these behaviors are passed down, they create a specific culture for the specific group of this species in this region. And so we got to talking about that. And so why am I talking about birds? I wanted to talk about it because I wanted to talk about how like the way that we strategize into accessing our knowledge is very helpful in our journey. It's helpful in our journey, and it's very specific to us. And the more that we very much in the way that the species evolve, that when we do that, we are confronted with a complex or an obstacle that we've never been faced with, that it forces us to utilize our inner knowledge to help us evolve and shed from our old versions of ourselves to elevate to the next level. So the more that we do this, the more that our circumstances and our ways of approaching a challenge can also become expansive expansive in our way of accessing resources, accessing security, stability, and health, right? Mental health, applying it to spirituality too, evolving ourselves spiritually, that in very much the same way that we do that with birds. Well, not we do that with birds, with how birds do it, that it can be seen as that too. So I use the example of the birds because with birds, you see the culture of these different birds start to evolve, and they pass it down to their offsprings, and the offsprings take it, and they can also use that knowledge and that strategy, apply it, and then maybe tweak it to the conditions that they're placed in. And so the correlation between the bird conversation and hermit mode and also spiritual evolution is that it really forces you to use what you know, use the wisdom and the knowledge that you've acquired on your journey to help you evolve your current circumstances. And so this is pretty much the end of this podcast. I want to talk more, but I think this is kind of it because I might go off into a tangent. But I want to thank you for tuning in to this episode, and for those who are returning to listen, I thank you for just coming back to listen, because y'all really didn't know like what was happening with this podcast, I'm pretty sure, but I am hoping to be consistent with it, because I have a lot of really great things that I want to do with this podcast, and I want to stick to it. And I know that it is going to take some time for this like big idea to evolve, but I'm hoping that you guys are going to be here to witness the evolution and be a part of that too. And so again, thank you so much for tuning in, and I hope that you can tune in to the next episode. And yeah, thank you. And that concludes this episode of The Narrow Path and the Floating Mountains. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you can tune in for the next one.